All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone. I am back with another Learning Tech Talks where we are continuing to explore the landscape of learning technology, cutting through the fluff. And today we are getting nerdy. So it is going to be a fun conversation. I'm joined by Lawrence Schwartz, Peter Brown, and Mark McDaniel. And we're going to be talking about, we've got a pretty diverse portfolio of things we're digging into. So we're going to get into the science of learning and how it's changing with the environment we're in, not necessarily the biology. And that's going to be an interesting one as we get into that. But you're going to see where we're going. So I'm not going to spoil it because you're going to want to stick around for the conversation. But as we get rolling here, we always like to have a little bit of fun. That's the goal as we do this throughout, even though we're going to be talking nerd science, all this fun stuff. So let's start with a simple one. Here's a curveball for you. Where are you in the world today? And today, let's start going, you know what? I'm going to go down.
Okay.
Peter.
Is that me?
Yep, that is you.
I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's as soon as we're done with this, I'm going to hop on my bike and pedal down to the Mississippi River and cruise around a little bit and back up the bluff and come home.
You better make the most of the nice weather that we're having right now. Yeah. It is beautiful right now. And by the way, I'm a Minnesota native. Now I'm down in Wisconsin, so very familiar with the area. All right, I've got another Minnesotan on the on the stream with me. All right, let's jump over to Mark. Mark, where are you?
Well, it is a curveball, Christopher, because typically I'm in St. Louis, where I work at Washington University in St. Louis. But this week I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico for a bit of a fall break. And the sun's not out today, but it will be, I'm sure. It's always out. And later this afternoon, I may hit a golf ball or two.
Okay. Wow, you know what? I will. If
I'm not very good
join you, I would.
Look, I notice I said hit a golf ball. I didn't say play golf because what I do can't even be compared to playing golf. I just try to hit the ball.
But it's fun. It's fun, and that's what counts. And as long as you're having a good time, that's all that matters. All right, Lawrence, you're up. Where are you right now?
I am dialing in from Frisco, Texas. We're right outside of Dallas, and we happen to be on the office. Our office is on the campus of the Dallas Cowboys here about 150 yards.
Hence the football helmet behind you. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of my teams. And beautiful day here, about 72 degrees, breezy, not a cloud in the sky, or maybe just a couple overcast. But yeah, great day here in Frisco, Texas.
All right,
so Lawrence, let's come clean on this, Lawrence. I've never seen that Dallas Cowboy helmet in the past 3 or 4 years. All of a sudden, they're 5-1, and your helmet's out there.
Hey,
I'll tell you, you really.
Hey, it makes a very nice background for the live stream as well. So it's an added bonus there.
For any stream.
All right. So we're going to reverse order, though, for the icebreaker question. So we're going to go in reverse order, which means, Lawrence, we're starting with you because my location has never changed. In 2 years of doing this, it's always the same here in Wisconsin, joined by my friendly houseplant, Fred. So let's switch over to the icebreaker question with you, Lawrence, which is, you've had time to think about it, and what is your cell phone wallpaper, and why did you pick it?
Let's see. Cell phone wallpaper. Well, it's a picture of myself and my wife, and she's wearing a cowboy hat. I think I picked this picture because she looks really, really good, and it covers half my face. So I can look good next to her. But yeah, I've had this one on for a while, and it kind of symbolizes her personality of being, a Southern girl, and brings a smile to my face. So, yeah.
And so you've got like an actual picture, like a legit picture as your background.
Yep.
Okay. All right. That's fair. I like it. That's one thing. Then that way you can always look at it when you look at your phone. All right, right. Mark, you're up. What is your cell phone wallpaper?
Well, my wallpaper is a picture of my Labradoodle.
Your Labradoodle. We got two people with like pictures for their wallpaper.
Okay. And the Labradoodle's named Indy because I'm originally from Indianapolis or Indiana, but I'm also a Colts fan, so it has a lot going for me. And people have Labradoodles may know they just love humans and they love to be around their humans. So this Labradoodle just as happy as can be in the car, anywhere, as long as around my wife and me. And so I just I have a picture, so when I'm not around the doodle, I
Then
can
that way you
brings
can
a
enjoy it. I
smile.
love it.
That's right, brings a smile to my face.
All the benefits and friendliness of a golden retriever, all the hypoallergenics of a poodle.
That's it.
It's a
Right.
good combination.
Well, oh, Christopher, that's interesting because a lot of people say it combines the brains of a poodle with the affection and good temperament
Okay,
of a
all right. Well, see,
Labrador.
my wife has
But
allergies. My
right,
wife has allergies, so
right.
that's why I
Now I'm
chose
glad
the
you said
other
it. My
one.
Labradoodle did not get the brains of a poodle.
Okay, all
It
right.
did,
Well,
yeah.
see, there you go.
But his eyebrow did.
All right, Peter, how about you? Cell phone wallpaper.
I don't have the brains of a poodle either.
Can't say
know.
that when we're talking about all this science that we're going to be doing.
I don't even know about wallpaper on my phone.
Let me look at my Motorola Razr.
When you told me you were going to be asking that, I had to look at my phone. It's just some kind of image from Apple, I guess.
Okay.
But you
All
can
right,
bet
so
I'm putting an animal on my wallpaper.
Okay, well, see, there you go, and actually, that's an actual wallpaper versus a picture, so I like that. All right, so mine, and then we'll get into it. We won't mess around with questions too much longer. So I picked. I've got this like beautiful mountain scene. I was born in Colorado. I love the mountains. Absolutely love the mountains, and my wife and I are talking about like we really want to move, and so it's like my inspiration to get all the to-do things taken care of, so we can sell the house and move somewhere that has some elevation. The Midwest is, well, you know, Peter, the Midwest is not necessarily known for its elevation changes. You're not going to get a bloody nose driving down 94, anything like that. So, all right. So let's shift gears because otherwise we're just going to end up talking about this all day long, and that's not going to do anybody any good. So let's start with this. I'd love to talk about. So Trivie originally joined. Lawrence, you're the CEO of Trivie, and this is how we first got engaged with this. So I'd love, so people maybe see this show and go, Trivie, what does that have to do with Mark McDaniel and Peter Brown and Christopher? We kind of get it. Give me a little bit of the backstory about one, what is Trivie? Where did that come from? And then how does that connect to Mark and Peter and what we're going to be talking about today?
Wow, how much time do we have?
Well, I'll stop you if you go too long. Don't worry.
All right, great. All right. Well, my partner and I started the company back in 2012 as a consumer game, and over a quick 2 years, we became the number one.
Like a consumer game? Like it started as a game?
Yeah, that's right. It was a trivia game. So it was a trivia game that you could play with your friends. And over a 2-year period, we became the number one game on the Apple App Store, and we had millions of downloads and lots of friends and lots of accolades. And we just we took a look at what we were building, and what we really built was this space repetition recommendation engine with all the algorithms we built into it to enhance that game experience. And so my partner and I both had experience in enterprise software, and one day he was watching his son play tennis at Washington University and was talking to another dad there, and what do you do, what do I do, so on and so forth. And he told him what we were doing and that we were thinking about going into the corporate learning or quizzing, testing, assessment space. And he said, well, there are 2 doctors here on campus who really specialize in that. And so we ended up talking to Mark McDaniel and Henry Roediger. And it turns out what we had built was kind of a rudimentary retrieval practice engine, which we'll get into here in a moment. But it was for space repetition. It was to build durable learning and fun and excitement and break the monotony of learning while you are actually retaining more information. So
did you? I warned you I was going to do this. So I'm curious.
Okay.
Did you know when you went into it, like with the trivia, was the goal memory? Like, was your goal with starting this trivia game to be like, we want to get people to remember more things, or was it, hey, we're going to have some fun? And then as you did it, you realized, well, this is actually a really effective thing for memory.
Yeah, it was the latter for sure.
Okay.
Because what happened was we were starting to realize that people were gaming the system because they were memorizing the answers. So what we did is we started building, space repetition based upon different interactions with our game. So what happened is we'd start getting messages from people going, wow, this is really helping me in science, or it's really helping me in history, because we had over 600 different categories. We had a lot of students playing our game from around the world, and we were starting to realize this is really helping in learning. So taking a step forward, as we started to go into the corporate learning space, we really do focus on what our beliefs were. And our belief was that knowledge was the most fundamental element of human growth, and the ability to retain and apply that knowledge really created the building blocks for better human experiences. So everything we decided to do and everything we focused on was to ensure that that happened, and the knowledge retention happened, and that transfer of knowledge would happen. So that's how we got into the corporate learning space just a few years ago. And what we do is we just take what we learned as a consumer game with millions and millions of downloads and billions of transactions, and learning what people did and their patterns. And we made this learning performance application that merged the brain science techniques of retrieval practice, the gamification, which we knew very well, some AI built upon statistical analysis of how people interact with the product. And then we added a social element where people can collaborate and have this peer-to-peer learning to really make learning more fun, more enjoyable, more durable. But for the learning administrator or the L&D professional, was a way to measure what's happening. And so we took all the analytics that we had back in our consumer product, and we ported those over into a corporate learning environment, and really started to look at how people are engaging with our product, how people are engaging with different types of content, what times of the day they are learning, where their strengths, where their weaknesses. And that's really the value we bring to an organization, is being able to measure the success, opportunities, ROI of learning across an enterprise when someone's just playing a simple trivia game on the other end. So that's where we are.
It seems simple. Interesting. So Mark, this is kind of, I want to get, go. Well, I was going to kind of get dorky on, I was going to get a little bit nerdy on this one, because I'm really curious, because I talk to a lot of different companies. I've been in the learning space for a long time, and it seems like sometimes this stuff happens by happenstance, or people, they aren't really sure what's going on. They're just kind of guessing. So from like the science side of this, you sound like you're about to jump in, but I'd love to hear.
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, let's do it.
I really want to emphasize why this is so transformative. What Trivie's doing and what Lawrence is talking about is transformative, because for so long, in the corporate training world, in educational world, and people's intuitions about learning, the idea was we need to stick stuff into our heads. We need to stick stuff into our brains. And we're going to do that by reviewing.
Yep. Rote memories, like we're just going to keep mashing on it with a hammer, and eventually
exactly. Retrieval practice is not emphasizing keep cramming stuff into the head. Retrieval practice emphasizes practice pulling things out of your brain. Practice retrieving. Knowledge is not usable unless you can retrieve it. Otherwise, it's relatively inert. So there are a couple advantages to the emphasis that Trivie and Lawrence place on retrieval practice. One is that you're solidifying retrieval rotes. You're creating potent, robust memories, much more so than if you keep reviewing the material.
Okay.
Lawrence found that in his 2 years in the game. We've been looking at that for 25 years in the laboratory. And we never, ever find anything that's more potent than practicing pulling things out of your brain than retrieving. So
that's almost, I'm gonna pause you there for 1 second on this, just to kind of emphasize this point, because I see a parallel to this, because a lot of times we talk about learning in learning and development, but we don't always talk about how important it is to kind of unlearn. And this is not the same, but it's a similar kind of parallel of learning. just putting things in your head, if you can't get them out, one, it's not really doing much for you. But two, you're saying the science behind it is actually saying the practice of getting it out actually does more for your memory than just packing more in and trying to keep jamming more in and hoping eventually it sticks. Is that fair?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we don't have time to get into a lot of the theories, but there's neurobiological theories, whereas retrieval seems to stimulate consolidation. There's cognitive theories, whereas retrieval seems to give you more roots to that information. So I don't know in the past week if you've tried to remember something. I've tried to remember the name of somebody that I was interacting with, and I couldn't get it. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, once I get the name, I've got to establish multiple retrieval routes. So different ways I can get to that. And that's what I started doing through retrieval practice. So if you can establish different ways to get to that knowledge through retrieval practice, then you're going to be much more likely not to forget it, to have it available when you need it. So there are several, and probably all these are correct, mechanisms by which retrieval practice creates more permanent memories, more robust memories, more usable memories. And what Trivie and Lawrence do is what they've done is they've recognized that, and they've made it to technology. And let's not forget that this is the part of this new technology that allows training to proceed through retrieval practice. That is answering questions rather than sitting in a 2 or 3 day intense training session where you're just taking stuff in. You leave, and the forgetting curve shows you're going to forget most of that within a couple of days, within a week, and then all the money's been spent on this training. The technology allows people, after they get out of that, to continually practice retrieving the information. And Lawrence will talk more about this. The technology allows adaptive learning so that each individual can have a personalized retrieval practice scheme to allow them to remember what's hard for them much more effectively.
Okay. So, I mean, and again, a lot of times I kind of reiterate these things back to make sure it's clicking on in my head as well. Is in some ways, this retrieval, you're trying to get people, the goal is, again, reversing your thinking, which is the more we jam in, eventually, and you and Peter and I can't remember the third, like you work together on a book, Make It Stick.
Roddy Rodiger.
Okay, there we go. Rhodey. See, I remember Rhodey because that's what you told me he goes by. So I'm like, Roddy, yeah. So, but essentially by building additional retrieval paths, you're actually reinforcing the memory more than you would by just sitting there like, okay, let's just keep shooting more darts forward and hope eventually one of them lands on the target.
You got it, Christopher.
Right. I think you're shooting the darts is a good example. If people think about video games and the complexity of sophisticated video games, the various strategies you learn as you fail are a great example of how you learn something by struggle, you retrieve it, you practice it, and then you hit a roadblock, you have to learn something else, and you build a much more complex understanding of what this game is or what this thing is I'm learning to do. And maybe it's a stunt bike, maybe it's something else, but that notion of retrieving it and applying it and then discovering where you reach a dead end and learning from that and building on it is very potent.
Okay. And that's how it's all coming together. Now, let me ask this, because Mark, you talked about you've been in the academic side of this for quite some time. Then Lawrence, you came into the play a little bit later by happenstance trying to go down this other path. Mm-hmm. I'm curious though, because this obviously isn't new. And as people, sometimes you hear this stuff where people are talking about the future of learning and and you go, I mean, we fundamentally as people have not dramatically changed. So what's going on? Lawrence, I'm going to throw this at you a little bit, because what really is going on with folks then that it's not, are they physiologically changing, or what's happening that it's like, hey, this is becoming more of paramount importance?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. First of all, people haven't changed. The biology of forgetting is something that we're born with, and it's going to happen no matter what. So from the beginning of time, we're going to forget things pretty quickly. Studies have shown, and Mark has done a lot of research, it can happen as fast as 2 days, 30 days, depending on the complexity and context of the information, but we're going to forget. So companies are spending millions of dollars on corporate training, whether it's upskilling, whether it's onboarding, whether it's safety and compliance, whether it's sales information. They really have no way, or a lot of companies don't have a way to accurately measure it. So what happens is you've got this huge budget going towards learning. There's no way to measure if that learning's working. We know people are going to be forgetting, and there has to be change. So what was really the lightning rod that precipitated this change? And I think it was the pandemic, because no longer could people go into a classroom or a conference hall or a conference room to start learning. They were having to do it remotely. And so if companies are spending information to upskill and provide information for training for their employees, how are they going to measure that? How are they going to monitor that? How are they going to engage their employees? And so that's where we feel there's been a dramatic shift. And the biology hasn't changed. The environment for learning has changed. And now companies are looking for technologies and techniques to measure that learning, measure that engagement, and try to tie that back to business results.
Okay. So I do want to, and that makes sense. And I actually kind of want to pick up on something that you brought up. Actually, both of you mentioned this, Lawrence and Mark, on this, because we talked about kind of the memory retrieval point, and you talked about adaptive, which I hear certain words and my ears go up because I go, okay, we're talking about memory retrieval, which I dug into that, which is important because I think people are saying that a lot. You hear the forgetting curve thrown around all over, and you're like, okay, but what are you doing with it? And adaptive's another one of those where people say, yeah, we have an adaptive engine. We have an adaptive engine that's changing things. I'd love to hear from you, Lawrence, how you define that, because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And then really, Mark and Peter, from you, why that is impactful or why that actually makes a difference, because it is one of these things where, for me, I personally, my take is adaptive learning is one of the major transformation that technology has enabled in the modern age. But I don't think people always grasp the magnitude of what it is. But again, it's very different. So Lawrence, on the definition standpoint, how are you defining it at Trivie?
Yeah. So adaptive is just another word for personalization to us.
Okay.
And if you think about retrieval practice, it's spaced repetition that uses a variety of different techniques. It's spaced repetition, it's different content types, it's interleaving different concepts, things of that nature. However, if people are getting the same information every day or every other day or similar information, it's probably not going to be something that they're going to retain. It becomes a noise and it becomes annoying. We know this because, we talk to other CEOs, what they have in their product, or other customers, what they've evaluated. And it's just getting this quiz every day or every other day. And when the rep sees it or the employee sees it, they're like, oh gosh, here's that quiz thing again. Okay. So what we do is a little bit different.
Going back to that mindset, if we just hit people with enough stuff, eventually it's going to do something. And it has the opposite effect.
Yeah, it has the opposite effect. That's right. So what we did is we looked at it a little bit differently. And we said, okay, so there is a mathematical model of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve that's been around for, I don't know, Mark, a couple hundred years.
You mean it didn't come out in 2018?
No. But it maps out when a person is probably going to forget a certain bit of information if they don't have a stimulus along the way. And so what we did is we took that and we married that with Bayesian statistics on how someone interacts with our game, and start to build a proficiency map of what they know and don't know. And so imagine going to a library and picking out a book and handing it to someone, picking out a book and handing it to someone. It's the same book over and over and over. They're not going to want to read the book anymore. What we do is we pick out the book, we give it to you, you interact with our trivia contest. It starts learning what you know and don't know based upon how you answer a question, how fast you answer the question, so on and so forth. And then it's going to start realizing that, hey, this person's probably going to need another book in 3 days, 3 weeks, whatever it might be, with some of the content from this first book, but it's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to give that to them. So what it does, it jogs their memory because they forgot a little bit along the way, but then reinforces it with what they already learned and then some new concepts that are similar that interleave that message. So it really is personalized. So I could play a quiz today that I received from Trivie, and depending on how fast I answer and the score and so on and so forth, it might not send me another quiz until next week. It might send me one Friday. But me as an employee, I'm not going to get frustrated now with, oh my gosh, now I've got this thing I got to do every day. It's going to start sending me things that are pertinent to me. And my brain's going to go, oh God, what is that? What was the answer? And I answer it and I get it right. And I get that dopamine spike and I'm like, oh, I got it.
You're getting another pathway. I mean, in some regards, going back to what Mark said, you're now creating a new pathway going, hey, this is a different angle. And you're forcing retrieval of this.
I'd like to build on that just a second here, because while it's true that humans have always been forgetters, it's built in, it's also true that the cognitive science, the research into how people learn and remember, has really come a long way in recent years. Mm-hmm. And I summarize it as 3 really big ideas, all of which Lawrence has talked about. One is retrieval. Retrieving from memory helps make it stick. Trying to put it in is a waste of time. Spacing out your learning over time so that you come back to something earlier, just as Lawrence was describing, and are asked to retrieve it again and knit it into what you've learned since. Very powerful for building understanding and carrying that learning forward. The third big idea is mixing up your practice of similar problem types. And so instead of trying to find the volume of 6 spheroids and then 6 wedges and so forth, mix them up at random, it's harder. But that difficulty is desirable because you get much better at identifying correctly the problem and picking the solution. So what Trivie has is a means now of bringing those principles of retrieval and spaced learning and mixed practice to the individual. And how much to space? Well, it depends on who it is and how strong they are with the material. Okay. So it's kind of a magical confluence, I think, between the science and where we are with technology and the kinds of things that Lawrence and his colleagues are developing there at Trivie.
Well, and I mean, that zone of development for people is going to be different. And that's what you're getting at, is the fact that by doing this, you're actually identifying the individual and saying, look, your zone of development is going to be different than mine based on what you know, what your experiences, things like that. And so how do we then tailor and personalize that to what you actually need to get where you need to go? Is that fair?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So
what you need is different than what I need. And so our adaptive goes back to what I said at the very beginning. It's personalized. People are busy. They have lots going on in their day, especially with this like linear path of agendas throughout the day of Zoom, 10 minutes of quiet time. They don't want to have to do something else like play a game. But if they get something, spaced out along the way that's interesting to them, relevant to them, and it takes less than 5 minutes, they're probably going to do it.
Okay, Mark, you're dying to jump in, so
I want
let's
to jump in on what Peter was saying, and suggest that technology has really changed the ball game. I think because retrieval practice, spacing, mixing up, those are difficult. They're challenging for people. And people's metacognitions, that is their own belief about their memories, after they engage in retrieval practice, spacing, and mixing, is that they haven't learned much.
Really?
And so because
it felt difficult.
So I do, listen, I have a learning strategies course that I teach at Washington University. And I do a retrieval practice demonstration. The demonstration involves, it actually is borrowed from an experiment that our co-author of Make It Stick did, Roddy Rodiger, where people read a short text a couple times in succession. So they're doing repeated studying. Another group, well, the same students then read a text and then they have to put it away and they try to recall as much as they can. That's retrieval practice. Pardon me?
Text. That's a different text.
A different text, a different one. Thank you. A week later in class, I say, well, try to retrieve those two texts. And I've got great students at Washington. I have one student, an A student, who does just super. And at the end, I asked him, well, what did you think about that retrieval practice, that text? She said, I didn't think I was going to remember much. And so I knew that rereading was going to help me. And then on the final test, she recovered so much more after the retrieval practice and after rereading. And for an A student, this was a real kind of a revelation that the way she had been studying was probably ineffective, even though she was A student, she was spending all day doing that. Instead, if she would substitute with retrieval practice, which didn't feel like she was learning, she was going to learn a lot more. Now that's what she does. It's the same thing with spacing and intermixing. So if you leave it to the student, if you leave it to the corporate employee to proceed with learning in a way that feels effective to them,
feels comfortable.
Feels comfortable. They will not do retrieval practice. They will not space or study. They will not mix. Technology allows the student to interact with the system where these are the things they're doing, and thus promoting much more learning than they would be able to achieve on their own. So that's why this is really revolutionary, because in corporate training, you give the material to the students, to the employees. You expect them to learn it using their own intuitive techniques, which are just absolutely ineffective and counter to what they ought to be doing. The technology allows them to interact with the material in a way that's absolutely optimal for learning.
Okay.
That's what's so great about this.
So what's interesting, and I actually, this is going to lead to another question that I'd love to kind of get some perspective on with it. Important piece where this is a balancing act that we're going through as practitioners right now, where, you know, sometimes there is this more push to say, well, let's just give people what they need and let them figure it out. And it's not that it's impossible, but they're going to likely be extremely inefficient at it, because to your point, Mark, it's not going to feel comfortable to do it efficiently. The efficient way to do it is counterintuitive to what they're going to do. So they're going to do what feels right, which is extremely inefficient. Going back to Lawrence, your point that in an environment where we've got no capacity, the workforce has no capacity to squeeze in, you know, I'm just going to take some extra time to read this book for the 37th time because that seems like the right thing to do to recall these things. It's just not a thing. But the challenge with that, and this is the part where I think sometimes as practitioners we've countered that, is to say, well, we'll do it, right? We'll deliver it because then we can kind of do that. And technology can be perceived as a threat. And I will say, I've seen this before where practitioners go, well, if the tech is better at personalizing this than I can be, then what role do I have? And I think, you tell me if I'm wrong, but from my perspective on this, you can't just use this technology just like, hey, you know, don't put any thought into it, because the reality is pounding, even if you can improve the efficiency, if what you're trying to get people to remember has no relevance to what they're doing, that's still a responsibility of a leader to say, hey, I got to pick the right stuff. We might be able to improve the efficiency, improve the capability, measure what it does, but there's still some degree of selection, because isn't it fair to say that if you're picking random trivia questions that have nothing to do with the person's job, that's not necessarily impacting performance?
No, it's not. But, you know, whatever training you're doing, obviously it has a meaning that you want them to learn that information, know the information, so they can use it on the job. And I think a technology like Trivie really goes across the spectrum, and it's going to hit like two areas on the spectrum. On the left side of the spectrum, it's the critical information you want your employees to know, whether it be safety information, compliance, whatever it might be. And on the right side, it's going to be, maybe not so important. Maybe it's during the onboarding process where they get their benefits information, or some manual they had to read just on company history. So a learning practitioner really has to look at the technologies they can leverage in the market that have the kind of the Goldilocks theory. Not too much, just enough, but can go deeper if need be. And unfortunately, and Christopher, you laugh, unfortunately, the problem—
I like the Goldilocks theory. Like, I like that, right? Because I know exactly where you're going. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's just right.
Yeah.
I have a lot of kids, so these things are
exactly
in my everyday repertoire.
Well, I just finished reading a book called Atomic Habits, and he mentioned that in the book, something about the Goldilocks theory, and it talked about the way humans do things, that if they're too hard, we steer away from them. If they're too easy, we steer away from them. We kind of got to get right in the middle. But anyway, that aside, the problem is that we see in the market is, aside from lack of time and people have got their way of doing things, is there's already processes and software in the market that companies are tied to. More importantly, learning managers and learning training groups are tied to, whether it be an LMS system, whether it's documentation, whether it's learning content. They don't want to change. And when we talk with our clients range from the largest beer manufacturer in the world to a large consumer products company to fast food, healthcare, whatever category or industry you want to pick. They all say the same thing once we start working with them. We really never knew what our people knew and didn't know.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of flabbergasted by that, because I always ask the question, isn't that important? Like, if you're not measuring the training, why are you doing it? Like, have you told the CEO, hey, we're spending $3 million on this LMS and sending all these people to a conference? Well, is it working? I have no idea.
I've got
Because
no idea.
they don't have any idea. And so when you start looking at what actually works, retrieval practice works. We know it works. Mark and Henry and Peter in their book, they talk about it from fourth grade students to medical students to flight students to corporate learning. Retrieval practice works. So we know that. So why don't people use it? Well, they don't know where to start, and it might be kind of complicated, and it's something, air quote, new. Second is, what technology do we put out there to leverage that? Well, there's a handful of companies now that are trying to figure that out. That's really our reason for being. That's everything we do and everything we focus on, is helping people remember information that they can apply it on the job and have a better life. So if you take retrieval practice and you take a way to engage those people, and then you take a way to measure those people, then you have a new paradigm of learning. And that's where you show progress. That the best companies are the ones that not only train, but they also measure that. Because if you think about it, aside from the person, a company's number one asset is knowledge. And if that knowledge walks out the door, or if someone doesn't absorb that knowledge and is able to implement it on the job, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of that asset, and that employee is not being leveraged to their full potential.
Okay. Well, and I think your point, this whole, and to your point on the knowledge walking out the door, you want to talk major crisis in organizations right now with the great, I call it the great reprioritization, but many companies are calling it the great exodus right now, as workforce is leaving in droves. This is a major problem for people, because to your point, if your talent's leaving, one, the knowledge is walking out the door. But if you didn't know what they knew and now it's gone, and you don't know how to rebuild what was there in the first place, that is a fundamental business problem. This isn't like well, boy, wouldn't it be nice if they could figure this out? Like, this is a core of things. Now, the one thing I'm curious, and this may be a question directed a little more at Mark, but I'd love perspective on both of this, because sometimes the knowledge piece gets a bit of a hard knock in the L&D industry, right? You'll hear, well, knowledge doesn't necessarily translate to skill. And that's true. It doesn't necessarily, or at least I don't think it necessarily does. but you can't build skill without the knowledge piece. But I think then you look at this knowledge. I think sometimes when people think knowledge, they think memorization, right? So well, memorization doesn't really do a whole lot. Well, yeah, that's true. If you can spout a bunch of Jeopardy facts, that may not necessarily help you in your job, versus if you have knowledge, you actually understand what these things are. But how do you differentiate the two? Because I do think that causes confusion in the industry, where people will say, well, knowledge isn't relevant to skill. It's like, oh, it's absolutely relevant to skill. If you're talking memorization, that's a different story. But I'm curious your take on that one, Mark.
Well, there's a lot wrapped up in that question.
There is, and we've got 20 minutes, so let's see how far we get.
Well, I'd like to reinforce your point that you do need to have basic facts at your fingertips. And in some of the things, I think some of Trivie's clients, I think that's true. You have to know what the operating procedures are. You have to know certain facts about your inventory, so on and so forth. So that's absolutely true. It's also true that having those facts doesn't mean that you know how to apply them, how to translate them into new situations. And for that, as Peter keeps saying, you need to build an understanding. You need to build an understanding of the interactions among the different components of the company or the safety standards or so on. And in cognitive psychology, we call that building mental models. So you're actually building a model of it, but it's a mental model in your head. So training, you also want training to help stimulate people to develop good mental models of the entire situation. And it's from this understanding, these deep understanding, these mental models, through which your workers can show inferencing, generalizing the knowledge to new applications. When the scenario changes a little bit, they're able to be nimble about using the information and applying it maybe in different ways. So it's true, you want that as well. And the interesting thing about retrieval practice is, with a variety of questions, you can produce all of this. So some questions can be focused on the facts. Some questions can be focused on having people do application of the knowledge. Some questions can be focused on them drawing inferences. And those different questions help foster these different levels of understanding. Mm-hmm. So you really need it all. And you need to assess for both of those things. One of the things that I study, and I've been doing for the past 15 years, is studying individual differences in the way people like to represent their concepts. And some individuals tend to approach learning as a memorization task, and they remember a lot of facts. Others approach it as an abstraction task, and they work hard to extract the underlying principles. And it turns out that if you're not careful, the same instruction can give you both kinds of representations. So depending on the individual's preference or approach. So you need good assessments to be able to ensure that employees have both learned the facts and also developed deep understanding. So both retrieval practice does both fostering that kind of thing, if it's designed appropriately, and assessing it appropriately.
And the mixed practice also
Good point.
Helps you
right.
Get a broader understanding of the differences and similarities in any domain. I'm reminded, Mark, when we were writing Make It Stick, and our editor at Harvard University was going through the evolving chapters, and she had sort of an aha moment when she said, well, this isn't just about learning. This is about learning how to go do. Okay. And that's what we're talking about, I think. It's more than accumulating knowledge about things. It's accumulating an understanding of how stuff works and how to put that to work in different settings.
Yeah. Mark, you said something really interesting that I haven't heard in this call today. You talk about assessment. When we talk to our clients, one of the first questions we ask them is, have you assessed their current knowledge, or have you taken an assessment after you finished a learning path? And if they have an LMS and they did some learning path, they're going to say, yeah, well, they took a quiz or a test at that time. Well, that's the most they're going to know on that topic is at that moment. And from that point on, it's going to start to decay. So a lot of companies don't look at that assessment score or period as an accurate measurement of what they know and don't know. As a company, we really break it down into four buckets, if you will, of that learning performance. One is an assessment. The assessment is not right after they take the test. The assessment is like now. What do they know? What they don't know? Because really, that's what you're trying to get to. Yeah, you want to take someone from where they are today, even if they have a degree from Stanford and a PhD from MIT. What do they know on this certain topic? And the goal of the learning organization is take them to another place, engage them, then help them retain that information, and then being able to measure that over time. That is the holy grail, so to speak, of the process of learning as we view it. Again, believing it's the most fundamental element for human growth. So if you assess people at the beginning of what they know, have a good way to engage them, like with us, it's gamification techniques, have techniques like retrieval practice and adaptive learning that help them retain it, and then able to measure that, then you actually have learning performance.
So this actually ties perfectly. You set that up so well. You would think I would have planned it, and I actually didn't. But this ties to the assessment piece, because something you said earlier, Lawrence, I think is a really important piece, and then it ties to what you said now, which is many organizations have little knowledge or visibility into the actual knowledge or skill of their workforce. It's really a bit of a black hole for a lot of organizations. I was reading a study not that long ago that said like 15% of organizations have any level of confidence in what they know about the knowledge and skill of their workforce, which is a bit of a terrifying thing when you think about how much time and energy and effort gets poured into this stuff. And so your example of, a lot of times we look at the assessment of, okay, well, they might have passed a quiz right after they finished it, but we don't really know what they knew before. They might have been able to pass the quiz but without even taking the course, let alone, do they remember it a week later? But I'm curious first of all, one, how are some of these assessments happening? But two, this kind of ties to the misconceptions thing, because I think there are a lot of these misconceptions that we have that continue fueling the way we do things that are actually not adding value. And I'm curious if there are any that immediately come to mind where you go, oh yeah, this is one of the things that we often see. And this is one of the problems we're trying to solve for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, take your last question first. So I was speaking with a L&D executive last week, and he's looking at trying to boost their learning performance. And he confided in me and said, look, we have an LMS. We have a sophisticated department. We know how to deliver training, but we need to take it further than compliance. And I was like, what do you mean by that? He goes, compliance is they finish their learning path or their training, and then they take a test. And it's compliance by my department that they pass the test, and we have a score. Okay, so what are you looking for? Things like, I want knowledge transfer, and I need to be able to measure that. And we talked a little bit more about that, and it turns out that's what a lot of L&D people want. They just don't know how to get it. They are doing this thing for compliance. They're sending out a quiz every day for a week or two, and hopefully people get it. Back to Mark's analogy of the student that kept on rereading the information, or the example of rereading the information doesn't work. So how do they do something that's going to increase that performance where their learning sticks? So that's, I think, a systemic problem out there. And as far as the assessments, when to do that, and I think that was the first part of your question, we believe it's before they go through any type of learning cycle, whether that's an LMS, whether it's an LXP, whether it's Classroom, whether it's a Zoom, because if you give an assessment, and we do it by essentially a quiz that you push it out through Trivie. It's a game, 5, 10, 15, 20 questions, whatever you want, bells and whistles, how they did, leaderboard, you can see, badges, but it gives you an assessment of what they know. If you are building your learning paths and your learning programs around in a vacuum, and you don't look at that assessment data, you might be creating these programs that people already know the information. It's a waste. So what you want to do is you want to look at those assessments and say, okay, we need to tailor our program to help fortify this knowledge and add new knowledge. And then we'll be able to reinforce that and measure it along the way. So we believe that you do an assessment before you do any type of training.
Okay.
You know, whether days, weeks, months, whatever it is. Before.
Well, and what's interesting, I just think of a prime example. So if I were to kind of break this down into something that I see where you go, okay, I this isn't helping us. I just think, okay, phishing. Phishing's a big thing in companies right now, phishing emails. And what's the typical approach that we take? It's like, oh, you click that phishing scam. Let's assign you this course, and then you're going to take the test. And then we can feel good about the fact that you probably know now, because you passed the quiz at the end, that you shouldn't phish. But I'm just think that you shouldn't click on emails that come from, right? That's compliance. That's a compliance mindset, which, as you're talking about all these mental models and all these other things you're talking about, that's not actually helping solve the problem. Because if you have no context really to what you do, because you just got assigned this course once, we don't know whether you really had a problem with it in the beginning, or if you just chose not to pay attention, or you had a happy accident and ended up clicking on the thing because you weren't paying attention because you were distracted. But this analytics then would actually give you the opportunity, because by the way, most quizzes you take in an LMS, you get a pass fail. I don't know really anything about whether you know anything. You passed 8 out of 10 questions, but I don't know how long it took you. I don't know which ones you got wrong. I don't know, what the context was or when you took it, if you took it after and went back to the content and just copy and pasted your answer. There's a lot that's missing, which adds to the inefficiency you talked about before of pouring a lot of time and effort into waste.
Right. If you don't know really where the knowledge gaps are and where someone's strong or weak, that's a problem. If you don't understand their ability to recall, that's a problem. If you don't understand their mastery of a topic, that's a problem. If you don't understand their accuracy of the information, that's a problem. And those are things that now digitally can be measured. It just so happens like no one wanted to do the hard work to do that. We did, and we give that to L&D professionals on the back end. And there's an aha moment when we started to develop our newest product. We call it V8, but it's Trivie Learn. You can see it on our website or wherever on the App Store. We went out and we did an interview with a ton of our clients, and we said, why do you like Trivie? What are the things you like about it, aside from you like your salesperson and you like the logo or whatever? And they all came back with the data.
Okay.
You made me more confident than I've ever been in my job, because now I can point to data of what my people know, what they don't know, where the risks are, and when I need to ask for budget, here's why. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never been able to have that data. The information's all out there. The ability to compile that and put into a visual presentation is the hard part. That's what we've done and we've mastered. So we feel that if you give people the measurement of what's happening with their people and what they know and don't know, and how well the information's being anchored for long-term retention, then you can actually manage it. The old saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. And if the asset is knowledge, and it's the most important thing for your company and its employees, you need to be able to measure it.
So let me ask this, because we're coming into the home stretch on this, and there's like 33 other avenues that I would want to go down, but I'm not going to. But let me ask this because to me, having talked through all this, it makes sense, right? It makes sense. You think logically, despite what you said earlier, Mark, right? And again, I'm making a little bit of a play that intuitive isn't always the right way. Like, this makes sense based on what you've said about the cognitive science behind it, behind the technology, behind some of these things. What are some of the barriers then that lead to people running into this? One, from maybe an L&D standpoint, Lawrence, where you're dealing with a customer who goes, I don't know that I can get there. But I'm also curious, Mark and Peter, from a academic standpoint, what are some of these just kind of gut or things that we've known for so long that we say, you're wrong? like you got to let this go. And I get it doesn't make sense. But what are some of those things? Because that's the kind of stuff
our sales
that
technique, by the way.
I'm curious though, because that's some stuff that really people may listen and go, yeah, this all makes it, but I just don't know about that.
Hey, Mark, can I jump in real quickly? Because you're going to give the really intelligent answer. I want to give the real world answer, what we're seeing. So the biggest impediment of people not doing anything is not doing anything. Companies have spent a ton of money on LMS systems or other learning programs, and they just don't want to do anything. They don't want to change. That's why SCORM content has been around for decades, is because they don't want to change anything. They want to make it easy to transfer content from one system to the other. So no decision is probably the biggest reason people don't make that change. The other is they think there's a big switching cost. Wow, if I do this, then I might have to throw out my LMS, and I fought long and hard to spend millions of dollars of my company's money to get that system, which with the technologies that are out there now, and you can read about some of them on a recent Gartner report on HR tech, that companies are looking for point solutions that are more agile. They're more cost effective. They give better data recognition, and you can implement them with everything you're doing and integrate them with what you're already doing. So people just aren't really wanting to switch, although they could switch really easily. So those are the two biggest things that we found on the market that people don't make the change. Mark, over to you.
Well, I don't know the corporate training world as well as Lawrence does, but I will say this. I think a lot of instructors and trainers and so on, they set up training according to habit, according to what they've known, according to what other people do, and intuition. And intuition is when you see the people you're training do very well, when you've massed practice on one particular topic and they're up at ceiling, and you mass it on and they're up at ceiling, but you fail to assess 2 months later and you find that they've forgotten almost everything. They don't do that. So your immediate awareness is, my learners are doing very well with the kinds of learning regimens that I've set up. So I think one impediment is that I think there's a lack of appreciation for the science of learning. And I have to say,
I totally agree.
The book that we wrote, Peter Brown and Rody Rodinger and I have to say, this book, Make It Stick, is super accessible because Peter Brown is a storyteller, and the science is interweaved into fantastic narratives about successful learning, successful training. And so I think one of the impediments is people don't feel comfortable about knowing the science of learning, about knowing what to change. And this book gives people just a very entertaining introduction into what they could be doing better. And as Lawrence says, with not much change or cost to what they're already doing. The changes they could make are not that major.
I like that point. You know what? You bring that up, and I think it's a really important. I did a keynote earlier this morning on this, and I think there is this. We've made this out to be in our head that it's this. This is this crazy, expensive, radical transformation from anything we've ever done, and we'll have to burn the ships because it's so far gone. To torch the castle because we have to. And it's like, if I'm hearing you, it's like, not really.
No,
not really.
It's not really.
Not
this
really.
radical.
I think there's a couple of things I've come across. One is we think about teaching, and we really need to be thinking about learning. So we need somehow to have the employees and have the students see that learning is their responsibility. And if we could teach them how learning works and give them the kind of successful experience that Mark is showing, you put the power there. And if you've got on top of that the kinds of things that Lawrence is doing, both to deliver the content and to measure, that's going to be a home run. I think another barrier is this notion that it feels difficult. We need to help connect people's, let's say, on the job learning or classroom learning with their own personal experience in their hobbies and the things they love to do, which the challenge they discovered failure is not failure, it's feedback. I can do better, and they take control. So I like to think of instruction is better in a coaching model where the athlete's on the field, knows that he or she has to do the thing, is going to get corrective feedback, but the coach isn't going to infect them with the skill. They have to develop it. So I think those are ways of thinking about learning and teaching that we need to change.
Okay. Well, and I think, and that's a great place to kind of, well, again, I could keep going on this, but I think what you brought up there that really is interesting on this, that I think you would all agree with this, is sometimes I feel like we're chasing the silver bullet and going, what's the easy answer? Can we get the, and is this spaced repetition, is building knowledge an important piece? But there's a lot more to it, but it's not as hard as we often make it out to be. And I think that's the piece that has been really helpful in hearing some of these things. And again, I think I can't believe 600,000 copies of Make It Stick. That number is still, there you go. Spaced repetition. I'll pull that out. I brought it back from pre-show. That's a lot of copies of a book in several years. So I think, checking out that, Lawrence, it's been great to have you here to learn more about what you're doing with Trivie and how you're changing the way we, not only look at memory and knowledge, but also the data behind it. To me, that's one of the biggest pieces that should speak to us as learning leaders is, hey, it's helping inform our decisions and helping us reach people where they are. So thank you all so much for being here. This was a super fun discussion. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll be back later this week.